Starting from Evil Dead Burn is shaping up to be one of the most terrifying horror movies of 2026, bringing back the brutal supernatural chaos that made the Evil Dead franchise legendary. Produced by Sam Raimi and directed by Sebastian Vanacek, the film is expected to push the series into even darker territory, with terrifying deadites, disturbing possession scenes, and extreme practical gore effects. Unlike traditional jump scare horror, Evil Dead Burn focuses on relentless psychological fear mixed with violent survival horror, where characters are trapped in a nightmare that keeps escalating every minute. Early reports suggest the movie may revolve around a horrifying family reunion that unleashes demonic forces connected to the cursed Necronomicon. Fans are especially excited because the franchise has recently returned to form with intense horror atmosphere, emotional storytelling, and brutal creature designs. The film is expected to combine the savage energy of classic Evil Dead movies with modern cinematic horror visuals, creating a terrifying experience filled with blood-soaked action, demonic insanity, creepy sound design, and shocking transformations. If the movie delivers on its promise, Evil Dead Burn could easily become one of the best supernatural horror films of 2026 and another unforgettable chapter in the legendary horror franchise. Next movie, Popeye Returns, is one of the strangest and most talked about upcoming horror movies of 2026, transforming the legendary cartoon sailor into a terrifying horror icon. Inspired by the recent trend of dark reimaginings of classic childhood characters, the film turns the cheerful, spinach-loving sailor into a brutal and mysterious killer connected to an abandoned harbor town filled with dark secrets. The movie is expected to mix slasher horror, psychological tension, and dark comedy, creating a bizarre but highly entertaining horror experience. Early concept details suggest eerie dockyard settings, stormy nighttime visuals, disturbing practical makeup effects, and violent chase sequences that completely change the image of the classic character audiences remember. Horror fans are already comparing the film to viral horror adaptations like Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, but many believe Popeye Returns could stand out because of its creepy maritime atmosphere and unique visual style. The movie may also include twisted versions of familiar characters like Olive Oil and Bluto, reimagined in disturbing ways for the horror universe. If executed properly, Popeye Returns could become a cult horror sensation filled with brutal kills, creepy humor, nostalgic shock value, and unforgettable nightmare imagery that horror audiences will either love or fear for years. Next movie, Killer Whale, is shaping up to be one of the most intense survival horror thrillers of 2026, combining deep ocean terror with psychological suspense and deadly animal horror. The story reportedly follows a group of people trapped in an isolated lagoon after a tragic accident, only to discover that a massive and highly intelligent orca is hunting them one by one. Unlike typical shark attack movies, the film focuses on the terrifying intelligence and emotional aggression of killer whales, making the predator feel more strategic, patient, and unstoppable. The movie is expected to deliver claustrophobic tension, underwater horror sequences, storm-filled cinematography, and nerve-wracking survival moments as the characters struggle to escape the deadly waters. Early buzz suggests the film will emphasize realism and suspense rather than exaggerated action, creating a darker and more emotional experience similar to The Shallows and 47 Meters Down, but with a far more intelligent predator. Visually, the film is expected to feature haunting ocean landscapes, eerie silence beneath the water, and sudden brutal attacks that keep audiences constantly on edge. If the movie delivers strong character drama alongside terrifying survival horror, Killer Whale could become one of the standout creature horror films of 2026 and a nightmare-inducing experience for anyone afraid of the deep ocean. Next movie, Verity, is expected to be one of the most disturbing psychological thrillers of 2026, bringing intense suspense, dark secrets, and emotional manipulation to the big screen. Based on the best-selling novel by Colleen Hoover, the story follows a struggling writer who is hired to complete the remaining books of a famous author after a mysterious accident leaves her unable to continue writing. However, after moving into the author's isolated mansion, she discovers hidden autobiographical notes containing horrifying confessions, disturbing truths, and dangerous secrets that slowly blur the line between reality and madness. The film is expected to focus heavily on psychological tension rather than supernatural horror, creating fear through paranoia, obsession, toxic relationships, and shocking revelations. Fans are especially excited because the story is filled with unpredictable twists and emotionally uncomfortable moments that keep readers constantly questioning what is real. Visually, the movie is likely to feature dark interiors, gloomy, rainy settings, eerie silence, and unsettling close-up cinematography that intensifies the suspense. If adapted faithfully, Verity could become one of the most talked-about thriller horror films of 2026, delivering a chilling mix of romance, manipulation, trauma, and psychological terror that stays in the audience's mind long after the movie ends. Next movie, Insidious Out of the Further, is expected to bring the terrifying supernatural world of the Further back in an even darker and more horrifying way. As the sixth installment in the legendary Insidious franchise, the movie promises intense paranormal horror, disturbing demons, and psychological fear that made the earlier films so successful. The story is rumored to explore deeper secrets hidden inside the Further, the mysterious spirit realm filled with trapped souls and terrifying entities that prey on human fear. Fans are especially excited about the possible return of familiar characters and the emotional connection to the Lambert family storyline, while the film is also expected to introduce new supernatural threats more dangerous than anything seen before. The movie will likely rely on atmospheric tension, eerie silence, sudden jump scares, creepy shadow figures, and terrifying dreamlike visuals instead of non-stop gore, creating a classic supernatural horror experience. If the filmmakers successfully expand the mythology of the Further while maintaining the emotional and psychological elements of the franchise, Insidious Out of the Further could easily become one of the scariest supernatural horror films of 2026 and a powerful return for one of modern horror's most iconic supernatural series. Next movie, Hungry, is emerging as one of the most mysterious and psychologically disturbing horror films of 2026, with early discussions suggesting a terrifying mix of survival horror, obsession, and human desperation. Although official plot details remain limited, the movie's title alone hints at themes of uncontrollable desire, starvation, addiction, or even monstrous transformation. Many horror fans believe the film may explore how extreme hunger, both physical and emotional, can slowly destroy the human mind, turning ordinary people into terrifying versions of themselves. The atmosphere is expected to be dark, claustrophobic, and emotionally intense, focusing more on psychological terror and character breakdown rather than simple jump scares. Visually, the movie could feature abandoned locations, cold lighting, disturbing body deterioration, and unsettling close-up cinematography designed to make audiences deeply uncomfortable. There is also speculation that the story may include survival elements or cannibalistic horror themes, which could push the film into deeply shocking territory similar to modern elevated horror movies. If the filmmakers successfully balance suspense, emotional trauma, and brutal horror imagery, Hungry has the potential to become one of the most unsettling hidden horror gems of 2026, and a film remembered for its disturbing atmosphere and psychological impact. In A Violent Nature 2 is expected to continue the terrifying and brutally atmospheric style that made the first film one of the most unique modern slasher experiences. Unlike traditional horror movies that focus mainly on the victims, this franchise presents much of the story from the killer's perspective, creating an eerie and deeply unsettling atmosphere that feels both realistic and nightmarish. The sequel is rumored to expand the mythology surrounding the masked killer while delivering even more disturbing practical effects, longer suspense sequences, and shocking acts of violence hidden within isolated wilderness settings. Fans are especially excited because the original movie became famous for its slow burn tension, haunting silence, and graphic kill scenes that felt raw and uncomfortably realistic. The forest environment itself is expected to play a major role again, with dark trails, abandoned campsites, fog-covered landscapes, and eerie nighttime cinematography that increases the sense of isolation and fear. Rather than relying heavily on loud jump scares, the movie will likely focus on dread, anticipation, and brutal realism that slowly builds psychological tension before exploding into violence. If the sequel improves the storytelling while keeping the terrifying atmosphere and experimental filmmaking style of the first film, In A Violent Nature 2 could become one of the most talked-about slasher horror movies of 2026 and a favorite among hardcore horror fans who enjoy artistic yet extremely brutal horror cinema. The upcoming Resident Evil movie is one of the most highly anticipated horror reboots of 2026, with fans hoping it finally delivers the terrifying survival horror atmosphere that made the original video games legendary. Unlike previous adaptations that focused heavily on action, this new film is expected to return to the franchise's horror roots by emphasizing suspense, isolation, limited survival resources, and terrifying biological experiments created by the sinister Umbrella Corporation. Early reports suggest the story may take inspiration from the first games, featuring dark mansions, underground laboratories, infected creatures, and claustrophobic environments filled with tension and fear. Horror fans are especially excited about the possibility of seeing iconic monsters like lickers, mutated zombies, and terrifying bioweapons recreated with modern visual effects and practical creature design. The film is expected to combine psychological fear with brutal survival action, where every hallway, shadow, and sound could hide something deadly. Visually, audiences can expect dark blue lighting, rain-soaked streets, abandoned facilities, flickering emergency lights, and intense horror cinematography that captures the dread of being trapped during a viral outbreak. If the reboot successfully balances faithful game-inspired horror with emotional storytelling and terrifying creature encounters, Resident Evil could become the best live-action adaptation in the franchise's history and one of the standout horror films of 2026. Hope is shaping up to be one of the most emotionally intense and mysterious horror thriller films of 2026, blending psychological fear with deep human trauma and suspense. Although official story details remain largely secret, early buzz suggests the movie may revolve around a small community or isolated individuals struggling with a terrifying event connected to loss, fear, and hidden truths. Unlike traditional horror movies that depend only on monsters or jump scares, Hope appears to focus more on emotional tension, mental breakdown, and the terrifying consequences of despair. The title itself creates an interesting contrast, suggesting a story where characters desperately search for light and survival while surrounded by darkness and psychological horror. Visually, the film is expected to feature gloomy landscapes, cold color tones, abandoned locations, eerie silence, and haunting cinematography that slowly builds tension throughout the story. Many fans believe the movie could combine elements of mystery thriller, emotional drama, and supernatural horror, creating a layered experience that feels disturbing both emotionally and psychologically. If the filmmakers successfully balance suspense, character development, and terrifying revelations, Hope could become one of the most underrated horror films of 2026 and a deeply haunting cinematic experience that leaves audiences emotionally shaken long after the credits roll. The Wolf and the Lamb is expected to be a dark and atmospheric horror film that blends psychological terror, gothic storytelling, and predator versus prey symbolism into a deeply unsettling cinematic experience. The title strongly suggests a story centered on innocence being hunted by evil, possibly involving cults, werewolf mythology, or a manipulative human predator hiding beneath a calm exterior. Early discussions among horror fans indicate that the film may take inspiration from dark fairy tales and folk horror, creating a world filled with isolated forests, ancient secrets, eerie rituals, and constant emotional tension. Rather than relying only on jump scares, the movie will likely focus on dread, anticipation, and brutal realism that slowly builds psychological tension before exploding into violence. If the cinematography features fog-covered woods, candlelit interiors, stormy nights, and cold gothic imagery that enhances the film's mysterious atmosphere, there is also speculation that the movie may explore themes of survival, innocence, manipulation, and human brutality in a symbolic way, making it both emotionally powerful and terrifying psychologically. Next movie, Obsession, is shaping up to be one of the most psychologically disturbing horror thrillers of 2026, focusing on the terrifying consequences of uncontrollable desire, manipulation, and emotional fixation. The film is expected to explore how obsession can slowly consume the human mind, turning love, ambition, or curiosity into something dangerous and deadly. Early buzz suggests the story may follow a character whose growing fixation on another person, or possibly a supernatural force, begins to destroy their reality, leading to paranoia, hallucinations, and horrifying acts of desperation. Unlike traditional horror movies that rely heavily on monsters or gore, Obsession appears to focus more on emotional tension, psychological breakdown, and suspenseful storytelling that keeps audiences constantly uncomfortable. The movie is also rumored to contain supernatural elements, which could blur the line between mental instability and genuine horror, making viewers question what is real throughout the film. Visually, audiences can expect dark interiors, moody lighting, unsettling close-up shots, eerie silence, and dreamlike sequences that create a haunting atmosphere filled with anxiety and dread. If the filmmakers successfully combine emotional storytelling with disturbing psychological horror and shocking twists, Obsession could become one of the most talked about horror films of 2026 and a chilling exploration of how dangerous obsession can truly become. Next movie, Scary Movie 6, is expected to bring back the chaotic comedy, outrageous parodies, and ridiculous horror references that made the franchise one of the most iconic comedy horror series ever created. After years of absence, the legendary parody franchise returns to mock modern horror movies, viral internet culture, streaming trends, and popular supernatural thrillers that have dominated recent cinema. Fans are especially excited to see how the movie will parody famous horror hits like Smile, M-Gan, Terrifier, The Nun, Five Nights at Freddy's, and many other modern franchises through exaggerated comedy and absurd situations. Unlike serious horror films, Scary Movie 6 is expected to focus entirely on non-stop jokes, awkward humor, slapstick violence, bizarre plot twists, and hilarious recreations of iconic horror scenes. The movie will likely feature exaggerated jump scares, intentionally terrible decisions by characters, ridiculous monster designs, and chaotic comedy sequences designed to entertain both longtime fans and new audiences. Visually, the film is expected to imitate the dark cinematic style of modern horror movies while constantly breaking tension with absurd humor and over-the-top reactions. If the franchise successfully captures the same energy and fearless comedy that made the earlier films popular, Scary Movie 6 could become one of the funniest horror comedies of 2026 and a nostalgic return to the golden era of parody cinema. Next movie, Vampires of the Velvet Lounge, is shaping up to be one of the most stylish and visually haunting horror films of 2026, blending gothic vampire mythology with dark nightclub aesthetics and psychological suspense. The movie is expected to take place inside a mysterious underground lounge where wealthy guests unknowingly enter a world controlled by seductive but deadly vampires hiding beneath glamorous luxury and neon-lit nightlife. Unlike traditional vampire horror focused only on action and bloodshed, this film appears to emphasize atmosphere, temptation, manipulation, and slow-burning fear, creating a more mature and psychologically intense experience. Early buzz suggests the story may explore themes of immortality, addiction, desire, and power, while gradually revealing horrifying secrets hidden behind the glamorous appearance of the elite vampire society. Visually, the film is expected to feature red neon lighting, smoky interiors, gothic fashion, elegant vampire designs, dark musical performances, and cinematic nightclub sequences that create a haunting horror atmosphere that leaves audiences fascinated and terrified at the same time. If the filmmakers successfully combine classic gothic horror with modern psychological thriller elements, Vampires of the Velvet Lounge could become one of the most unique vampire movies of 2026, delivering a chilling mix of seduction, violence, mystery, and dark supernatural horror that leaves audiences fascinated and terrified at the same time. Clayface is easily one of the most unique and surprising upcoming horror films of 2026 because it transforms a classic DC villain into a terrifying psychological body horror story rather than a traditional superhero movie. The film reportedly follows Matt Hagen, a struggling actor whose life changes forever after a dangerous experiment or mysterious substance turns his body into living clay, allowing him to change his appearance but slowly destroying his humanity in the process. Instead of focusing on action-packed comic book battles, the movie is expected to explore fear, identity, loneliness, fame, obsession, and physical transformation in an emotionally dark and disturbing way. Horror fans are especially excited because the film is being linked to a more mature and R-rated horror tone, inspired by classics like The Fly and The Thing, where body mutation itself becomes the main source of terror. Visually, Clayface could become one of the most horrifying comic book films ever made, featuring grotesque transformations, melting flesh effects, distorted faces, unstable human forms, and nightmare-inducing practical makeup combined with modern visual effects. The atmosphere is expected to be tragic, emotional, and psychologically intense, showing a man slowly losing control of both his body and his mind while becoming a monstrous creature feared by society. If the filmmakers successfully combine tragic storytelling with terrifying body horror and strong cinematic visuals, Clayface could become not only one of the best horror movies of 2026, but also one of the darkest and most unforgettable DC films ever created.